Two monkeys were in a tree at the edge of the jungle. They looked across the grassy plain and saw a lion sleeping. One monkey said, "Watch, I'm going to have some fun with this lion." He walks up to the lion and kicks him in the behind. The monkey takes off running with the lion in hot pursuit. The monkey rounds a corner and sees a large group of monkeys sitting under a tree. The monkey grabs a newspaper and sits down with the other monkeys and pretends to be reading it. The lion comes up to the monkey and says, "Did you see a monkey run through here?" The monkey says, "You mean the one that kicked that lion's behind?" The lion says, "Is that in the paper already?" George Washington and his men are looking for a place to stay one night after a long fight against the British. After marching through the woods for some hours, they find a farm. Washington knocks on the door and the farmer answers. Washington says, "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry to bother you. My men and I have been fighting the British all day and are very tired. Can you put us up for the night?" The farmer looks around and says, "Well, I only have room for one of you." Washington looks around at his 100 men and points to a young soldier. "Peters, you were wounded badly in that last battle and kept fighting. You deserve it. Step inside." Peters steps up and stays with the farmer for the night. Now, without their buddy Peters, the men feel as depressed as ever and have no place to stay. Washington and his battered soldiers continue marching. Eventually, they find a brothel. Washington knocks on the door excitedly, and the headmistress answers. "Excuse me, ma'am. My men and I have been fighting the British all day and are very tired. Can you put us up for the night? We can pay." The mistress closes the door for a moment. She excitedly turns around to all the prostitutes. "It's been months of no business, girls, no men and no action. But we have a whole caravan of handsome young soldiers to serve us here. Get ready." The girls giggle excitedly and begin to primp for all the soldiers, having gone months with no business. The mistress opens the door and says to George, "We'd be happy to put you up. How many of you are there?" Washington turns around and looks at his men and says, "Well, 99 without Peters." The mistress says, "You've got to be shitting me." A circus performer is driving home after a long day of training when he is pulled over by a police officer for a broken light. The officer looks in the car and sees a collection of knives in the back seat. "Sir," he says, "why do you have all those knives?" "They're for my juggling act," the circus performer replies. "I don't believe you," says the cop. "Prove it." So the performer gets out of his car and begins juggling the knives flawlessly. Just at that moment, a car with two guys in it drives by. "Wow," says one to the other. "I'm glad I quit drinking. These new sobriety tests are hard." When I was 16 years old, I bought my first pack of condoms. I was very nervous as I walked up to the pharmacist's. She asked if it was my first time buying condoms. I told her it was. "Do you know how it works, or should I show you?" she asked. "I would like a demonstration," I replied. The pharmacist took one condom out of the package and rolled it around her thumb. She told me to be very careful, that it's very important to make sure it's secured well. Then she looked around the store and noticed there was nobody else there. She quickly locked the door and took me to the back of the store. She took off her shirt and bra. "Does this excite you?" she asked. I nodded. Then she said it was time for me to put on the condom. While I was doing that, she took off her pants and panties and laid down on the table. "Hurry up, we don't have much time," she said. So I quickly jumped onto her. It felt so good that I almost came immediately. She looked a bit disappointed and said, "I hope you secured it well." "It sure is," I replied, giving her a thumbs up. A lifelong atheist dies and is surprised to find himself before the pearly gates. St. Peter sadly shakes his head and tells him that because of his non-belief, he must be sent to hell. The devil greets him there and shows him where he will now spend eternity. A lovely, cozy cottage set on a beautiful hillside, where the sweet smell of flowers fills the air. The devil tells him he will want for nothing and to feel free to walk the grounds. One day, while he is out strolling through the idyllic gardens, he comes across a tall wall. Curious, he climbs one of the many trees and, peering over the wall, is shocked to see a fire-filled field with people writhing in agony and screaming hopelessly. He is very disturbed by this sight and returns home. The next day, the devil pays him a visit and asks how he is enjoying eternity. The atheist says he finds hell to be a lovely place, but is concerned about the things he saw on the other side of the wall. "Oh," the devil says, "those are Christian sinners." "But why?" the man asks. "Are they suffering so much while I, who didn't believe in God at all, am here in such comfort?" "I don't know," the devil replies, shrugging. "That's the way they want it." A young Scottish lad left home for the first time to go to work in the city. After he had been there a while, his parents called to see how things were going. "Everything's fine," the young lad said, "except for one thing. My neighbors are a little strange. The man on one side of me beats his head against the wall constantly, and the woman on the other side sticks her head out of the window and screams." His father said, "Well, son, you should avoid those people." The boy replied, "I do. I just stay in my room all the time and play my bagpipes." A little boy was bragging to everyone in his kindergarten class about how his father had taught him to count. The teacher overheard and said, "Okay, let's do a little test. What comes after 2? The little boy responded, 3. "Good," said the teacher. "What comes after 7? 8, said the little boy. The teacher then said, "And what comes after 10? The little boy thought for a moment and said, "The jack." A farmer had 2 horses, but he couldn't tell them apart. So he went to the vet and told him of his problem. The vet suggested he tie different colored ribbons around their necks so he could tell them apart. A few days later, the farmer came back and said, "Your idea didn't work. They rubbed up against a tree and the ribbons came off." The vet then suggested the farmer dab different colors of paint on the 2 horses so he could tell them apart. A few days later, the farmer came back and said, "That didn't work either. The paint washed off." The vet thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you measure them and see if there's a little difference in height?" The farmer said he would give it a try. A couple of days passed and the farmer returned to the vet's office. "That did it," the old farmer said. "I measured them and found that Black Stallion is 2 hands taller than the white one." A young couple was preparing to get married. They were out celebrating the night before when they were involved in a traffic accident that resulted in the deaths of them both. They went up to heaven together, and when they arrived at the pearly gates, they asked St. Peter if they could get married in heaven. St. Peter replied, "That's a request I've never had before. Let me check, and I'll get back to you." A month goes by, then 2, 3, and finally 6 months pass. St. Peter comes back to the young couple and says, "I've worked things out. You can get married in heaven." The groom says, "That's wonderful news, St. Peter. But we've been wondering, what if things don't work out between us? Can we get a divorce in heaven?" St. Peter says, "Folks, it took me 6 months to find a preacher up here. I'm not sure if I could ever find a lawyer.